This is Captain E, and I want to tell you about a charity that is near and dear to my heart. The Shawn Jenkins Children's Hospital at MUSC is responsible for saving my niece's life and so many others on a daily basis. Hooked on Miracles is our King Mackerel tournament in Charleston on July 14th through the 16th, and it's the oldest King Mackerel tournament in South Carolina. We support the Children's Hospital with 100% of our proceeds. This event is a fun-filled weekend of fishing with family and friends and raising money for this great cause. You can make a difference, too, by going to www.hookedonmiracleskmt.com and join our efforts as a sponsor or participant. That's www.hookedonmiracleskmt.com for all the information. Thanks to all of our sponsors and especially Key West Boats for keeping this great event going every year. We'll see y'all in Charleston in July. Michelob Ultra and Mick Ultra wholesaler Better Brands Incorporated are excited to announce a new partnership with Sober Skipper, part of the Sea-Tow Foundation. While we know consumers enjoy relaxing days on the water with Ultras in hand, it's important to remember to drink and boat responsibly. Choose to be or to designate a sober skipper before leaving the dock. Do it for your family and friends, your passengers, and everyone else on board. Michelob Ultra salutes all sober skippers who take the pledge. Cheers, and we'll see you on the water.
Realtree has always had a connection to the fishing industry and the outdoor lifestyle. In 2016, Realtree expanded on the traditional business of creating the world's most effective camouflage patterns to create a fishing brand and family of patterns designed to connect the woods to the water and strengthen the bond between the two worlds. We couldn't be more excited to be working with the industry's top brands, retailers, and anglers to continue our growth, and we hope that you will join us. Enjoy Realtree fishing patterns inshore, offshore, on the lake, or at the dock. Learn more about the extensive line Realtree fishing patterns, apparel, gear, and more at Realtree.com. Trilogy Outdoors.
All right, folks, welcome back to Trilogy Outdoors Podcast. You know, we do talk everything outdoors, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague and co-host, Senator Stephen Goldfinch. And today, Stephen has lined up once again another incredible guest to we try to talk hunting, fishing, something outdoors in every show, and sometimes we get off of the topic, and we love that. That's what it's all about. Stephen is a lot like myself. He's passionate about many things. So once we get on to a subject, it could go anywhere. Today is something that Stephen and I are both very passionate about, which is waterfowl, duck hunting. And our guest today, Stephen, I'm putting it on you. You've got to introduce our esteemed guest today.
Well, I am honored to have Mike McShane on the podcast. Mike has been a friend for quite a few years now, but he has been a tireless advocate on the Ducks Unlimited board, tireless advocate for waterfowl in South Carolina. And Mike, I'm just honored to have you on the show, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing some wisdom with us. Thank you so much.
Well, my pleasure to be with both you and Captain E, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about something that truly is a real genuine love to be outdoors, particularly pursuing waterfowl.
Yeah. Well, you would know probably better than others, considering your position, sort of where we are, with let's just say waterfowl in general, where we are with waterfowl in general in the nation, in the Southeast, in South Carolina. And we had a real interesting interview with a great friend of mine, Charles Snap. Have you ever heard of Charles Snap? Do you know Charles?
I do not know Mr. Snap.
Ooh. Charles is, I'll just call him, my words, not his, but the father of duck guiding in Arkansas. He's well, I don't want to say how old he is on on the podcast. He probably wouldn't mind, but back in the early 70s, Captain E's, when he said
that's right,
he began duck guiding in Arkansas, and it was not it was just not a thing back then. It was not a thing in Arkansas. Duck hunting obviously existed, but not on the industrial scale, for lack of a better word, that, it is or certainly was through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And Charles grew a massive duck guiding operation in northeast Arkansas, which I actually worked for. I guided for him through high school and college when I was at the Citadel, and got to know him real well. I have called him a great friend for really the last 30 years and 25 or 30 years. And Charles, told me an interesting story that, I sort of knew, but I haven't really thought about. And he said, Stephen, the duck industry, for lack of a better word again, really began in South Carolina with Carolina Gold and the rice plantations and the amount of rice that was produced in South Carolina. I mean, really fed the world. And on top of that, it fed the ducks, of course. I mean, we know that sort of intuitively. We know that coming from South Carolina, but it fed the ducks. And the duck industry really bloomed and blossomed here in South Carolina, especially at the beginning of the 20th century, when we had the Northeasterners come down and start buying big tracts of land and preserving those rice fields for wetlands and wetlands management. And he said, Arkansas took a page out of y'all's book. And today, unfortunately, we are lagging behind in South Carolina. We have lost our rice culture and our rice history, and other states have picked it up and to their benefit. And I hope that we can get it back. The flyway, according to Charles, and you may know more about this than anybody, but he says the flyway shifted from the southeast, which was, a big flyway when we had rice, to the central flyway. That's where the majority of the ducks are now, and really even some moving westward. You hear a lot of people talk about Oklahoma and Nebraska nowadays, even Colorado getting some massive amounts of ducks. But we had massive amounts of ducks in South Carolina at one point in time, didn't we?
Well, I think to your point, South Carolina, we're very fortunate in the history of what we had in waterfowl hunting really did come out of the rice culture. The fact that that product was being produced gave the habitat that for migratory wintering birds was perfect. And the fact that, as you also identified, a little bit of the irony of that as the rice industry transitioned toward the Midwest and ultimately to the West Coast, you had a recreational pursuit which really did preserve these managed title impoundments, these properties, to do things. And although we don't, and I don't suspect, Stephen, we'll ever see the rice industry in that type of scale.
Yeah.
We know that there are people producing Carolina Gold rice in a smaller scale, more of a boutique a style, but I don't think we'll ever get back to the scale that we used to see 150 years ago, of course.
Right.
But what we can see, I believe, is still a successful waterfowl management, waterfowl seasons, and it's really helping both federal and state agencies that own the land plus the private landowners to really be incentivized to maintain those rice fields. If we maintain that habitat and we maintain water levels, and to a degree, try to manage disturbance as best you can, I truly believe you will have waterfowl. That's our experience on our private lands south of Charleston and Beaufort County in the Ace Basin. And I think it's true for others there. I get that certain things come in and play, whether we have a droughty year or a wet year or a cold year or not so cold year, et cetera. Those are all factors that we've always had to deal with. But I believe if we can maintain your water levels, manage the right habitat, and therefore protect the habitat in disturbance. And when I think of disturbance, I don't mean necessarily duck hunters, although I must admit there are a few of our colleagues out there that sometimes have this belief that you can go bang away 60 days straight and that you're going to have a quality hunt.
Yeah.
But and that perhaps is for a later discussion. But I do think the disturbance that I'm more worried about is that if we see areas in and around these sensitive wetlands get encroached with some type of urban sprawl, urban development, that's going to have an impact.
Yeah. No,
that's a long-term impact.
Certainly. And we had a very interesting conversation recently with Senator Campson about a lot of this stuff and the migration patterns, not of ducks, but of people from the Northeast moving to South Carolina and what that entails on our wildlife. And, you think, well, it certainly impacts our quality of life, how we move around, whether or not we can drive from point A to point B. But, quite often what's lost is, okay, you fill that wetland over there and you fill that wetland over there and you stick 1,000 homes here. And before you know it, you have lost connected habitat that is really critical for a species and for us to continue to manage and enjoy that species.
And you highlighted the connectivity, and I think that's so critical that it can't just be a one unilateral landowner, whomever that may be, private or government landowner, and it has to be really a whole ecosystem to really have the quality of the pursuit of waterfowl for the health of that species.
Yeah.
To do that, and as I think what I heard you say, Senator Campson, I've heard the expression that we may be undergoing the biggest migration of population growth that we've ever seen in our state history right now, and we welcome those people. What I'd like for them to think about is the value of why they're coming here because of that beauty, and that let's not have the unintended consequence of throwing off problems. When Hurricane Floyd, Hurricane Michael, they've all kind of run into each other as many as we have.
Yeah,
but
so 2015 hurricane?
Hurricane Florence and Hurricane Michael came
Yeah.
through, and both of them threatened particularly your area of the state.
Yeah.
And as you recall, Santee Cooper was really struggling with one of their former ash pits as that high water was threatening to flood that. Governor McMaster had to call a mandatory evacuation for the city of Georgetown.
Yeah.
And the models that were being used were showing that there could be 8 or 9 feet of water on French Street,
Right.
which would be devastating. It devastated towns like Nichols and Conway, et cetera, but it would be very devastating to Georgetown.
Sure.
And as you recall, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
The models didn't understand of all the preservation, conservation, restoration of all the wetlands in and around, be it on the Santee, the PD, or the Waccamaw, absorbed all that floodwater.
God, I hate to interrupt your train of thought, but I'm so glad that you brought that up because I have been wanting to talk about this for so long, and you have a tendency to get right to the point, and you do a dang good job of it. So I have been preaching to anybody that would listen for years that managed wetlands are better for us than unmanaged wetlands. I mean, unmanaged wetlands are good, right, in and of themselves, but managed wetlands are infinitely better for lots of different reasons, especially if you believe that we need to try to attract and keep birds of all kinds, wading birds and waterfowl. And
absolutely, there's no way that we could do enough on our own with man-made structures.
Sure.
To offset the impact of the loss of what naturally is there.
Exactly.
Natural wealth.
Exactly. And you highlighted a really important part. When the floods came, the models didn't reflect what we had done. And all of that water sank into that, that system in Georgetown, which is a big system of managed wetlands, sank into that system in Georgetown, and the bridge didn't overtop, and Georgetown didn't sink into, a watery grave. And we're all thankful for that. But you know what? We need to learn something from that. I've been talking with Audubon, and here's my opportunity to talk to Ducks Unlimited right here, Captain E.
Yep.
I've been talking to Audubon about an idea, and I want to talk to Ducks Unlimited about it too. So it's undeniable that we have what used to be brackish impoundments along the coast that are now, have saltwater intrusion. And whether that's for man-made problems, erosion or, just lack of care by whoever owns it, maybe the state owns them. Now they have saltwater intrusion, and now you got problems on the coast. So my idea was, let's take some of those let's call them saltwater impoundments now because they're not brackish anymore. Let's take some of those saltwater impoundments and let's trade them out for impoundments that are clearly freshwater, farther upriver, that are decommissioned. There are millions, maybe that's an exaggeration, there are tons of decommissioned rice fields upstream that are clearly in freshwater that could be recommissioned, that could be put back into play, that our wading birds and our waterfowl could be using. And guess what? The extra benefit of that is they're sinks for flooding. And I think we ought to be petitioning the Corps and OCRM, DHEC, to give us a swap. That's not in the tool belt right now, but to give us a swap for any rice fields that are in danger of saltwater intrusion. We ought to be able to recommission a rice field in freshwater right now, so that we can say, well, look, that one's no longer going to be managed. This one is. What does Ducks Unlimited say about that? Let me put you on the spot.
Well, I think first I would say, as a board member of DU, I can speak for it. I believe DU's position has always been is on the preservation and conservation of all managed tidal impoundments there, and to provide incentives to landowners to maintain them, so that you don't get in the situation you identified, which I know exists, that either landowners have not been able to maintain them for whatever reason, either a storm breached their impoundment, and they just don't have the financial resources on their own to do it, or the Army Corps had made it bureaucratic. Now, to their credit, here recently, they worked with a collective group of us to design what's a general permit for following a best management practice for the repair of managed tidal impoundments. So that if you had a problem, whether it be a disaster like a Florence, Michael, or Matthew, or just had a need because of age of a trunk system or whatever, to then be able to go in and do the repair and not wait for it to get to become prohibitively costly. When one had to wait to get a permit, it could be 60, 90 days, and you and I know that could do a lot of damage to that type of resource.
Yeah, the habitat.
This allows that to do that. That's a big step for the Corps to do that. It puts the responsibility on the landowner simply for notice, but allows them to move right in and do those repair work following a best management practice, which is what you're going to do anyway.
All right, so let me put you on the spot then. So how do we recommission decommissioned rice fields? Most of those, I mean, not all of them, most of those seem to be freshwater rice fields. All you got to do is pull up Google Earth and you can see all the ditches in South Carolina that have been cut, and the rice fields of age. How do we recommission those and get those back into play so that we can start bringing more wildlife, more waterfowl, more wading birds, and help with the flooding, as you mentioned? How do we get that back in South Carolina?
So in some early discussions with some of your colleagues in the General Assembly about restoration of what we would typically call broken rice fields, it was clear that it's going to probably take some initiation of the legislature to allow that, because you get into the navigable waters. Now, would DU support something like that? I think DU would always be in a position to support good habitat for migratory species, waterfowl being the prime species. But as you and I know, other species benefit as well. Whooping cranes showed up in South Carolina not because they followed an ultralight over the mountains.
Right.
They found that they liked the habitat here.
Yeah.
White pelicans and things like that are coming here. So there's huge wildlife benefit to that. And to your point, many of these broken rice fields were really the original rice fields, the inland rice fields that were freshwater based there. And I think we ought to at least give good thought to how they may be preserved and become functioning systems. Like you said, functioning not only for wildlife, but functioning as a way to prevent, is potentially flood mitigation.
So
do that.
You may know, you probably do. You're up to speed on just about everything in South Carolina, but you may know I authored the bill for the Resilience Bank. Senator Campson authored the bill for the Conservation Bank, huge thing for South Carolina. I authored the bill for the Resilience Bank, which, I'm biased, but I think it's also a huge deal for South Carolina. The Resilience Bank, its purpose is to buy properties that are, in danger of flooding or flooding. It's a voluntary system where homeowners or property owners can sell to the state, sell to the Resilience Bank, and the Resilience Bank is working with local partners, then returns that property to a wetland. That's been hugely successful. I mean, it's only a year and a half, 2 years old. It only got funded last year. But so far it's been hugely successful, and I've been thinking about ways to further expand its mission, or without getting into mission creep, but to further expand its mission where we can work on these sinks, for lack of a better word, these wetlands that can become sinks for floodwater through the Resilience Bank. And
well, I think this is a great opportunity. You're not going to build a reservoir today,
right?
At one point, someone made a suggestion that maybe we just need to build more reservoirs to hold those capacity when water, particularly waters that come into the state from North Carolina.
Yeah.
But hey, by the time you got it permitted and you can't go very deep, right?
Yeah.
And so I think where you're pointing is a more practical possibility to do this naturally, and we can do it fairly quickly.
Yeah, and I'm going to need Ducks Unlimited's help with that idea, but I certainly think there's opportunity there, and we need to explore it at some point. All right, let me change gears a little bit. We're gonna talk about ducks still, but I want to know what's on Ducks Unlimited's radar. I mean, what's going on in the nation? What's going on with this? I mean, I'm always interested in the Eastern Flyway. Why are we? I don't know. Why are we not getting what we should be? Why are we not getting our fair share? Let's put it that way.
There are going to be a host of reasons here, and none of these are excuses. These are just, I think, discussion points.
Sure.
The Atlantic Flyway is uniquely under a great deal more urban pressure.
Mm-hmm.
You also see that landowners inland now have greater capacity of creating impoundments and having planted feed there. So a system like what you and I are used to is typically, which ours is brackish, it's all natural feed.
Mm-hmm.
It is not something that we can go plant corn in, as an example.
Right. It's managed wetlands for those listening.
It's just a managed brackish water system. With a trunk system that's wonderful technology that's 300 years old but still works.
Yeah. So what you'd be growing is widgeon grass and wild celery and that kind of stuff.
All natural.
Which ducks love, but it just comes up naturally.
And I think we had the season that just ended. For us, which is northern Beaufort County, we had a nice mix. It is a changed species mix, but over my lifetime, where we would see huge number of pintail, lots of wild mallards, we're not seeing those. We see them on occasion. We had pintails actually this past couple weeks, but it's primarily gadwall, widgeon, green and blue-winged teal that stayed throughout the entire season, which, as you recall, wasn't something we saw 25 years ago.
The
typically
teal
would move in and move out.
Mike, it seems to me, and I'm not trying to sidetrack you, but it seems to me like the teal have outdone everything else. I mean, gadwalls have done very well too, it seems like, but it seems like the teal have just outdone everything. And I don't know if that's to the detriment of wild mallards, but we could also, at some point in time in this conversation, we may get into release mallards.
I was going to ask you if we could talk about that.
Please.
We absolutely can. We can talk about anything, whether it be offensive or not. That's the benefit of owning your own podcast.
Amen.
So yeah, absolutely. But it does seem like teal have just done fantastic in the last, I don't know, let's call it 5 years, maybe 10 years. They've just blown up, and mallards have decreased tremendously.
Correct, to where the Fish and Wildlife Service has actually been looking at doing some reductions, as you know.
Yeah.
In that, and is captive birds having an impact? Is it habitat? Is it climate? Is it pressures? I think it's probably all the above at some point, some degree there. But and you see mallards potentially moving west. Some of the studies of the tracking when birds have been with satellite tracking. We always thought years ago, Stephen, that all our birds came strictly out of the Atlantic flyway of Canada.
Right.
We now know that many of our birds do come out of the prairie pothole region.
Yeah.
But also we know that birds from the Atlantic flyway go to the Central flyway as well. And the scientists, and I would challenge, and I recall having spirited discussions with DNR biology staff at that time when I served on that board, would say that mallards are inherently lazy, that they will not move unless they're forced to, either because they have no food or things freeze up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would have thought that based on what I've seen in the last week or so of weather in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, that we would see more, but we didn't.
Right.
And I do think it's a species of concern.
Can I ask you something? So I have heard anecdotally some of the things that you were just touching on too, that you're actually getting some mallards that are learning to overwinter up north. Actually, I think I read a story somewhere, I can't remember where, that there was a group of mallards that learned to overwinter in Alaska. I mean,
Wow.
is that something that's evolving? Is that happening? Or is that just, small groups of ducks that have learned behavior that, that's not a population-wide thing that's of concern?
I don't know that I would have any scientific proof that I've heard of, but I've heard similar anecdotes about that. And it makes you wonder if are mallards adapting to whatever the pressure and the climate in that area? Is it that they're able to stay in open water? Are they able to find open water? Mm-hmm. Are they finding no disturbance that really moves them around?
Well, you can imagine though. I mean, if they figure it out, and they don't have to make, I don't know. I mean, it depends on where they end up down south, but they don't have to make a 3,000 mile. Let's call it 6,000 mile round trip in some cases. I mean, they're going to be fat and happy by the time the female shows back up in northern Canada or Alaska in this case. They're going to be fat and happy, and they're going to be ready to breed as compared to the mallard drake that just made the 6,000 mile round trip and is about to die.
Correct, and who's looking for energetics and
right.
So there's a couple studies that a family foundation I'm engaged with is these are some things that I think need to be known, like energetics. This is probably things the state agencies and the Fish and Wildlife Service ought to have been doing. They just no longer have the capacity to do it.
Yeah.
For a host of different reasons. They just don't have the staff. They don't have the technical expertise. And what this is doing is trying to coordinate between those entities to give us some better answers on how does energetics play a role here? How does less disturbance, more disturbance, and how does either open water or no open water play a role? You and I may have our thoughts on that, but we probably might be surprised by some of the science that may show us that.
Yes. So, I mean, a minute ago you mentioned some of our big ducks are coming from pothole regions, and I found that to be true too. A guy in one of our groups on our property ended up killing a banded. It was actually a banded pintail from South Dakota.
Wow.
And I was just shocked when I heard it. I didn't actually see the bird, but they called me and gave me a report, and I said, South Dakota. I'd sort of imagined that could happen at one point in time, but when it's actually on my property, it just blew my mind that the duck didn't come from east side of Canada. And
Well, you recently did something that I think will benefit our whole state. You took a lead to persuade the General Assembly to help our state natural resource agency put a focus on waterfowl.
Mhm.
Something that I don't know why, but it just sort of disappeared.
Yeah.
And the fact that you've done that now because the state's assets impact my management, your management. We can't do this unilaterally. We got to be able to do it in a coordinated system that's functional.
Hmm.
And I think that you should be given great credit. I can give you great credit for having the foresight to persuade your colleagues to fund a position to bring that. And the individual I'm acquainted with, I have high confidence that she should be able to really bring some good intellect and good technique to that role.
I think she will too. And I get there's no reason not to announce what that is, right? So the the idea that Mike is talking about is an idea that I've been bouncing around with and sharing with some of my colleagues for a couple of years now, maybe going on 3 years now, Mike.
At least 3 years.
Yeah, maybe 4 years.
Yeah.
It's the idea of a waterfowl manager for South Carolina, and you may be surprised, Captain E.
That's awesome. I'm sitting here getting excited.
Did you know?
Why didn't my name get brought up for this?
It's a great,
I'm just kidding.
great question. We
Okay.
should have submitted you. Did you know we didn't have a waterfowl manager for South Carolina?
I did not know, but I would have thought that definitely. I mean, that would have obviously come under DNR. I would have thought we had somebody.
Well, yeah, right. I mean that's the point. Is when I ask people like you or anybody else that are not intimately involved in
Right.
politics. I mean, you know what's going on, but not intimately involved. We don't have a waterfowl manager in South Carolina. And the answer is no, we didn't. The answer is no, we did not. I don't want to call his name, Mike, but you know who I'm talking about. We have the crown jewel, what I would like to think is the crown jewel. Now, you're from Ace Basin area, so you're going to say the Ace Basin's the crown jewel.
I know where Steven's getting ready to talk about.
All right, but I'm from Santee Delta, okay?
Right. So Santee has beautiful water.
It does, and the Ace Basin has beautiful water as well. But we have what I believe is the crown jewel, or pretty darn close to it, for East Coast duck hunting right here in Georgetown County. And DNR's response was to hire a bear biologist to run that waterfowl property. Now, to his credit, he's learned it, and he's doing a dang good job now. But, you can imagine there being a learning curve coming from a bear biologist to run a 50,000-acre waterfowl preserve. And so that just it's not an indictment on natural resource departments across the nation, but there is a problem of depth in natural resource departments in all of North America, not just South Carolina. There's a problem of depth, and waterfowl is one of those problems of depth of knowledge, I mean. Waterfowl is one of those things that we have been lacking in South Carolina. Waterfowl knowledgeable waterfowl managers. One of those things we've been lacking in South Carolina for so long, and it's been reflected in our WMAs and our public water management programs. And I'm so proud that that's done, Mike. And thank you for bringing that up. I had not even thought.
You should
about
be
that.
proud of that. It's an asset that belongs to the public. They're valuable assets. They truly are gems. I mean, literally, you and I know what the market value simply would be. That the state could not afford to purchase those today.
No way.
And we want public access for those type of projects. You want constituents to really have an enjoyable recreational pursuit on these properties. And I think agencies, and not just here in South Carolina, but including federal and other states, they can get very focused on trying to be the jack of all trades, and therefore they really don't become the master of any one. And you can't do that with waterfowl. I think for me, we choose not to be on our private property. We've chosen to be a focus on a waterfowl ecosystem. We're not trying to focus on quail. We're not trying to to focus on other things. Maybe deer and turkey can kind of come along okay with everything if you manage your timber well.
Sure.
But for waterfowl, you really need to have that focus. You've got to be able to be really thinking strategically about how are your water control structures and where they are and how are they functioning and how often do you need to replace them. And if you decide you need to replace them or do the maintenance that we talked about earlier on these impoundments, you can't just decide to go do it over the weekend.
Yeah, I've built an impoundment, and
so you know that it's very time consuming and you have to be thoughtful about what you're doing, very strategic in that. And I hope that that's what the agency will take advantage of with this position is to allow one to really focus on those at each of the WMAs that have those type of waterfowl impoundments.
Yeah, it as I mentioned, I've built an impoundment, and you obviously, I mean, you have a fantastic waterfowl place, and understand it requires you said this, but I think it's important to reiterate, it requires a lot of thought and forethought into how you're going to manage that property. Really, you have to lay it out for the entire year. I mean, it's not like, obviously, if there's a problem, if there's a break, you do things on the fly, you make things work. But, I mean, you've got to have a plan for that impoundment at the beginning of the year, and you got to work through that plan. You can't just willy-nilly throw some disc in the ground, throw some fertilizer in the ground, throw some seed in the ground, flood it, and hope for the best. I mean, it's not intuitive. I guess that's the best way to put it. It's not intuitive, and it requires a person, at least one person that is a full-time person, managing, thinking through these things, and keeping up with all the properties in South Carolina. Mike, any idea how many acres we have of managed wetlands?
Actually, that's a great question, and I'm going to explain why I think it's a great question, because we thought for years that there were about 80,000 acres of managed tidal impoundments through the coastal plain. So several years ago, we thought that a group of us thought that number is not accurate. And it was because we didn't think we were taking in consideration the inland rice fields, et cetera. We believe today that there's approaching 250,000 acres that were at one time actively cultivated for rice.
Yeah. Wow.
Of that 250,000 acres, think about 250,000 acres.
Yeah.
3 times what we thought we had for generations of recent generations, and that many of those are not functioning. This may help us get to what we earlier discussion. Can we get some of them back to be functioning? Not necessarily for rice, but for wildlife and flood control or flood mitigation there. So I think we're have a much better appreciation today. That experience that you and your citizens, your constituents went through during those hurricanes, I think helped highlight the value to all of us, whether you've been here for generations or you're just here recently, of what these are.
Yeah, and I'm not a climate change alarmist. I believe in climate change. Now, I'm not going to get into whether or not it's man-made or not, but certainly the climate is changing. It's been changing since the beginning of the Earth. But there is a scientist who you probably know, Mike. Do you know Dr. Kaminsky at the Kennedy Center?
Dr. Rick Kaminsky,
yeah,
recently retired and well thought of waterfowl biologist.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. He had done quite a bit of study. In fact, one of our mutual friends had quite a bit of his instruments in his plantation on his wetlands. And Kaminsky's claim was that managed wetlands capture carbon at a rate of like 3 times that of an unmanaged wetland, and he proved it. Right? I mean, he had the studies, he had the equipment, he did the carbon capture stuff. I don't exactly understand how you capture carbon, but he did all of that, And he proved that managed wetlands capture carbon at a rate like 3 times that of an unmanaged wetland. And the point being, if we have so many of these unmanaged wetlands, and we know that they, A, attract wading birds and waterfowl, B, and all of the invertebrates and everything that come along with that, by the way, B, they collect floodwaters and keep them out of the streets of Georgetown and Conway and Charleston and everywhere else. And C, they capture carbon at a rate of 3 times that of an unmanaged wetland. What are we doing? What are we doing letting these unmanaged wetlands sit idle? I don't get it.
I think it's a compelling case that we're going to persuade everyone that this is beneficial to us all, whether it's because you're concerned about, whether it's a climate change that you have a concern about, or frankly, you're just a waterfowl enthusiast, or frankly, just a birder on that, or if your concern is about flood conditions.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it hits
so this is a unique asset that we have that actually probably has a very large scale constituency who should support this.
Yeah, it hits almost every constituency. I mean, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
I don't know how it can be a more compelling argument when it hits every constituency you can imagine. I mean, the only constituency I can imagine, not wanting this would be PETA because they think it's, going to contribute to the killing of more ducks. But I don't really care about PETA, so put them to the side. Everybody else in the world with a brain understands this is a good idea, or at least they should understand this is a good idea. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe I haven't done a good enough job explaining that it's a worthy endeavor for us. But it's a worthy endeavor for us, and we got to figure out a way to do it. And obviously,
in a way that people are willing to invest in that, whether that's invest in it from a monetary standpoint or invest time and effort to do that, not to provide, and maybe to provide what then becomes a greater benefit is the conservation and preservation of those areas, which also has a benefit for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, at some point in time, off record, you and I have got to get together and figure this out. With the
Okay.
with the McShane mind, and I'll probably grab Campson too, and he'll tell us where we're wrong. Then we could figure this out. But it is a worthy endeavor, and we really should figure it out. All right. So we're approaching 45 minutes, but I want to ask you a couple more questions. Number one, how's our duck population looking? Nationwide, North America. How's the duck population looking? You see it moving in the right direction, the wrong direction?
It seems there are pockets of really good news. The formal, because you got Youth Weekend this weekend, we haven't seen I haven't seen the final numbers. I've seen some surveys of the different flyways.
Yeah.
It seems like even the Atlantic Flyway, principally in the Mid-Atlantic region, even with some of the cold weather, they had some really fine duck hunting out there. The Pacific Flyway, even with past droughts, had a really good season. Based on reports.
Yeah.
I'll be really interested to see the numbers and see how it trended against last year. Last year was considered a good year. We still had a, quote, liberal season based on the regulation, meaning we had a 60-day season with a bag of 6 there. If we have that again for next year, then that'll tell me that the service feels like we are still a healthy population broadly. There may be species of concern, but overall a healthy population.
Now, when are the annual surveys done? The big
should be coming up now. That last year they didn't do them.
Right. I knew that.
And many of us tried to persuade, and we were in the middle of an administration change, that they should do them.
Yeah.
That they could do them safely.
Yeah.
this is simply Mike's point of view. We can't allow COVID to be the reason that we just drop everything.
Yeah, right.
And we could work through this and do it. My understanding is that they should be doing them this year, and they should be doing them over the next 45 to 60 days.
Okay.
And that'll play a role into the regulations, because then that information will transcribe into the different flyways for their technical review and their regulatory component, because all that needs to be done by July. So the states can make their regulations for this upcoming season.
I can't remember the last time. It's been a while since the state has done aerial surveys. Any idea why South Carolina's not doing aerial surveys anymore?
I'm trying to think if we actually, during my tenure on the board, which I need to state was a decade ago.
Yeah.
I think we did do some. And Stephen, sometimes the state agencies, because someone sees a plane up, and then you get pounded on because they're, quote, you're wasting state resources. In this case, I don't think we're wasting with state resources. I think it's part of our data we need for good management.
Yeah, you would think. All right, so we mentioned climate change a minute ago, and I personally have seen it. I have heard from friends and other duck hunters that have seen it, but it seems like the vast majority of our birds on the Atlantic Flyway are getting later and later. If you were going to, the best way to put that is, I got asked this year if I wanted to go in on a draw hunt. Of course, I do want to go in on a draw hunt. I hunted Murphy a couple years ago, and we're putting in for Cedar. Got 3 points now, and the question inevitably is, what are the dates? And my answer was as late as you can possibly get them.
Correct. So as you recall, our seasons typically ended before the end of the month, end of January, and we got the feds to move it to where it allowed the state to go to January 31, and then from there go to 60 days back. I think tradition is kept a season in Thanksgiving.
Yep.
And then, as you recall, there's a break.
Yep.
And then, with your support and your colleagues, we put in a state youth hunt day, as you recall, an opportunity to take. So you have a federal youth day, and you also have a state youth day. Mm-hmm. That one usually falls in between the split.
Right. So the question inevitably becomes, if the mass population is moving later and later, should we be moving the duck season later and later? And the natural tendency you get from biologists and whatnot is absolutely not. The pairings begin to happen, and when you start messing with that, you start messing with bigger macro issues. But if they don't start actually moving until later, how do we know the pairings aren't happening until later? Is this where are we going to end up looking at later and later seasons because they seem to be moving later?
It is going to take a large discussion with the leadership of the Fish and Wildlife Service to move it beyond January 31. It is going to be a heavy lift. Mm-hmm. I'm not suggesting it couldn't be done, but it would probably require a large effort nationally to do that. Yeah. And I learned an expression during my tenure on the DNR board that I really think is really telling about about staffs in general, not just South Carolina DNR, but state and federal agency biologists. They're really good about polishing the silver. They just forget sometimes the silver is owned by the public.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
And so the balance of making sure the silver is well polished, but also how do you allow the public to use silver without damaging it, it's a balance. And perfection can't be the enemy of good work. We need to let people do things. We're never going to have a pure, perfect system because we're human. And I think the fact that the state has invested in a waterfowl specialist, that may not be the technical term, but it might be a waterfowl specialist,
Sure.
means that we ought to see a strategic plan how we're going to manage our WMAs and public waterfowl hunting areas with soon. What's the strategic plan? How much money is it going to take to bring them up? How many trunk systems need to be reviewed? And it may take a little bit of time to get through them all, but I think that's what we ought to be trying to do. That's what you and I do as private landowners.
Yeah.
And budget accordingly.
I'm guessing that number is going to be scary.
Well, it probably will when you consider an average water control structure is about $35,000. But what we can do is help landowners find federal programs that might help them accommodate some of those costs. May not cover it all, but will certainly help whittle some of that down and maybe provide the incentive to do some things.
Yeah.
And same thing for the state. You helped reauthorize the State Conservation Bank. You played a big role in accepting a suggestion from those of us on the bank board of making a grant to DNR for Pittman Robinson funding and NACA funding.
Yep.
That $3 million for the two funds means that the state sees between 12 and $14 million that can be used for restoration, building trunks, buying equipment, hiring people.
Yeah. That's a big deal.
It is a huge deal.
It's a big deal. And, if you know what you're looking at, if you just get in a boat and you ride down the river and you approach public water impoundments. I'm not going to say where, but public water impoundments, just about anywhere in South Carolina. You'll see trunks that are broken, dikes that are broken, trunks that are literally in sideways. Have been tried, somebody has tried to install them sideways or crooked. Doors that are left open or doors that are left closed. I mean, it's a mess, Mike. And it is time for us to get our duck house in order. And I'm so glad to have folks like you that are looking after the resource, that know what you're talking about, that have been in the trenches, that have watched these things, participated in these things, fought for waterfowl, because without good folks like you, we wouldn't have the resources we have now, and it wouldn't be getting better. And it is getting better. There is no doubt about it.
Well, you're very kind, both you and Captain. You're very kind to even suggest that I'm a bit player in all of this.
Well, you
do
are.
have a favor to ask of you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Captain E, a little politics here.
Come on, I know. I play the same game. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Your friend who you spoke to before me filed a bill this week, Senate Bill 1039, called the Carolina Conservation Enhancement Act.
Right.
This is to bring a discussion to bring dedicated funding back to this conservation bank and to expand its board to include transportation, commerce, and ag to the board. It's going to have a conversation in there about sales tax. And I have to tell you, I don't have a strong opinion on sales tax. I'm well aware of many members' strong opinions about dedicating sales tax to a certain arena. But I'd ask you to give some thought to looking at 1039 and putting your name on that. I'd like to promote the fact that you're part of a solution that I think we all are looking to for that.
Well, thank you so much.
1039.
I will take a close look at it, and I can tell you if Senator Campson is the author of the bill, then we are probably lock and step.
I think, and I'll suggest, I think you're going to find that he is. He took some input from me for whatever that may be worth. Which
Even
may not
better.
be much.
Even better.
and it's got some. There's key components of it that I think will be really good for a lot of what you're looking to achieve as well.
Great. Well, I look forward to continuing to work with you, Mike.
I want to jump in real quick and first off say thank you so much, Mike, and for enlightening us on so many different things. And I'll say this much: Ducks Unlimited has been explained to me more so over the last several years exactly the impact that you guys have on duck hunting. I was one of those public water guys that sits outside of the rice fields, and you know I'll just say that originally I was like, well, man, it must be nice to be in there, but God, they're feeding those ducks, and like this is ridiculous. Like let some of them fly around and do whatever. But after getting inside of one of those and hunting, and from a lot of research over the last couple of years, our waterfowl here doesn't exist without those places. I've spent a lot of time hunting in Remini over the last couple of years, which I love hunting there. And I heard I actually did a feature article with South Carolina Sportsman magazine. I had a writer with me, and we went to a certain place there, two ponds, and he wrote an article on that. And he was sending me all the ridicule that he was getting from that article about, hunting the tame mallards in there. And I know I don't think we really got to step into that as much as we would like to have, but maybe down the road we'll get you back in there. But all of these places are so important in the birds that the rest of us get to hunt. Having that area, having those areas, the rice fields and everything else, to bring those numbers of birds back in are so important. And thank you for all the work you do with Ducks Unlimited. And I hope one day to get to meet you face to face, Mike.
I look forward to it, and thank you for acknowledging that private landowners do play a role in how public hunters can enjoy the sport. It doesn't happen on the river alone.
Nope.
It's a mutual respect has to be there. And I think we're doing a better job of that. We try to mentor some of our friends that hunt in the river that at times when I find them on our banks, I don't just, I try not to react strongly. I try to educate them about how we can help them. And I'd rather make them friends.
Yeah,
exactly.
It all benefits us all long term.
That's exactly right. Mike McShane, we're honored to have you. Thank you for coming, sir.
Most definitely.
Gentlemen, have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for the time.
Trilogy Outdoors is produced and edited by Trilogy Outdoors Media. Be sure to follow us on all the podcast platforms as well as our social media pages on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And also don't forget our other brands, Southern English Radio Show and Walk 'Em All Outdoor Magazine. To find more information, visit TrilogyOutdoorsMedia.com. And remember, if it's anything dealing with fins, fur, and feathers, you're going to find it right here on Trilogy Outdoors.